here.
Perfect. And then if we have anybody join in, obviously that'll be great as well. So welcome everyone. And for those of you who are familiar with the series or new to the group, I just want to welcome you all. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Maddie Nickel. I serve as the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement for Penn Nursing. So I serve as the point person for all things alumni, alumni weekend, working with our alumni board, all of those kinds of things. And I'm thrilled to welcome you all tonight to, sorry, sirens outside. Anyway, but I'm thrilled to welcome you all tonight to our fourth session in a 5-part event series in partnership with Penn Nursing and Project Knitwell. As I mentioned, this is the fourth in the 5-part series. If you haven't been able to catch some of our previous events, they are all available on our Penn Nursing calendar on the website. If you have any trouble accessing those, feel free to reach out to me directly and I can send those links along to you as well. But just in terms of some housekeeping tips, Lauren talked about it a little bit, but please feel free to keep your camera on, off, whatever you're comfortable with. You can utilize the chat throughout, and I'll keep an eye on that in case Lauren doesn't see any questions that come through, but you're more than welcome to unmute and, share your question or your comment or whatever it is out loud. We are always really excited to hear from the group. But again, thank you all for coming. And I will also share some information about our 5th event in February at the end. But with that, I'll hand things back over to Lauren.
Great. Thank you so much, Maddie. I'm so excited to see familiar names pop up, and I'm really looking forward to sharing some advanced techniques and swapping some patterns and thinking about primarily, what do you want to learn next? And that really is the ultimate goal with the way that we organize our knitting projects and the planning piece. So that is really one of the most rewarding parts for me, that part in the creative process and thinking about what is the plan that I'm going to attack next. And one of my favorite ways to do that is to think about, what technique do I want to learn? So I'm hoping that tonight I can give you a taste of a few different techniques that you might be able to find a project that matches with that technique that you're interested in. And then start thinking about, what is it that we're trying to accomplish when we're knitting? And I think of novelty as one of the most researched aspects of how do we keep our minds engaged throughout the aging process, and making sure that you try new things that are outside of your normal box, that are outside of what you might typically try. I know that I am very prone to knitting the same pattern more than once, but the research says that it's better to try new things. And I like the idea of having multiple projects, the familiar project, the challenging project. That way I'm doing both, right? I'm building those new neural pathways while at the same time I'm gaining the rhythmic pattern of something that's I'm really well versed in and I know how to do very easily. So there's really something appealing about having a big grand plan. But I would like to challenge you to think about knitting, instead of thinking about it as the product and the full fabric that you create, or the completed shawl, or the sweater that fits just right. Instead, think about it as the small steps, that you are moving forward one stitch at a time to make that larger fabric. And the small steps and the power of small, as Michelle Obama calls it in her new book. If you haven't picked it up already, and whether or not you're a Michelle Obama fan or not, she is a big fan of knitting, and she has really broken down so many aspects of why knitting is so good for you. And one of those pieces is the power of small. And she talks about how having consistent small actions that feel purposeful, that make you feel like you're continuing to move forward, is so crucial to our well-being and our sense of purpose, and our ability to deal with uncertainty, which obviously we are all dealing with different degrees of uncertainty in our lives. And I'm hopeful that knitting can help you deepen and expand your knowledge base, and to think about how do we give ourselves the opportunity to feel that sense of purpose and that sense of reward as we're completing the project. I think it's fun to think about both the process and the product. That's a big part of creative thinking and the creative expression. And it's not just the process, and it's also not just the product. I like to think of it as both are important and rewarding in their own ways. So, thinking about how to pick the right project for the yarn that you have, I'm going to pop up our the Padlet that I've used in numerous different scenarios. So, this is a really great resource tool for you, and it can give you a sample and kind of a sense of other types of projects that you might be keyed into in the future. So I like to think of these as applied techniques in fiber, and some of these advanced techniques here I'm specifically put together for you to I'm going to talk through tonight. But you'll also see we have a color theory class, and you'll also see some really important references to planning a project around the color and the texture of the materials that you have can be a really fun part of the process. So color is very stimulating to us. The ways that we capture color in our knitting projects can be really one of the most rewarding parts of it. So I like to think of color theory as three basic theories and three basic ways to examine color through color wheels, through color harmony. So what does psychology say about our preferences for color? And then the context in which those colors are used. So the associations that we make with color are even more important than the necessarily the technical aspects of the science of the color that's reaching your eyes and so forth. So I like thinking, and I left some of these reference points, these three websites for you to dig in and potentially learn more about color theory as part of the planning process. I think is really key to that. And those of you that may not have joined us in the past, I do want to point out to you some of the details that are included in our other sessions on the benefits of knitting and what does the research say about the benefits of knitting. And you'll see here, one of my favorite things is that prescription to knit, and why I like to say a row a day keeps the doctor away. The research talks about how it reduces blood pressure and stress and helps manage anxiety, delaying memory loss, and easing physical pain and improving mood. And I really like to think about social prescribing as part of our process. And I know I've had doctors recommend yoga and meditation, and I would love to see a world in which they're also recommending that we use our hands more, and knitting would be part of that as well. So it's
Lauren,
not far from reality. Sure. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it looks like we have a hand
Oh,
raised
wonderful. Yes.
here.
I would love to hear from, let's see who's here. Martha, how are you?
Good. How are you, Lauren?
Good.
So I was going back through the previous session. So I attended the first two, and then I was out of the country for the third, but I watched it. And then I love your, these templates so that I could go back and look. But where can I find like the links to all of them thus far so that I can kind of save them?
That's a great question. That's a really great question. So we use the Padlets, and I'm just going to pop this Padlet link in for you because it will also link you right here in this top left corner. This is the bibliography page that I also referred to in the past. So you'll see all of the articles and the research interventions, and then the how to knit section as well is on that page. So both of these are separate links. Would it help for me to put both of those in the chat? I guess this is the research.
Yeah, that would be great because I was trying to find them from the previous sessions, and I couldn't really find them easily.
Yes.
I was able to save the last session, but not, yeah, the previous. I went back to the previous link, so I couldn't really find
It
them.
is hard.
But
Yeah.
I
Tablet
like the
doesn't have a
color palette thing because that's always, I typically don't do anything, I do monochrome, I do colors, but I don't ever mix and match. And
yeah,
because
interesting.
what I might like, other people might like, not like, or whatever. But that was a nice way of thinking about the color, but I couldn't find it. So yeah, if you can put it somewhere so that we can go
Each of
back to
those,
these
yeah.
and
I
then.
also put in some of the previous presentations, I had those QR codes up, and during the presentation, you could actually hold your phone up to those as well. And I will find, let's see, where is I don't think I have the color one handy, but I can put it in, or maybe Maddie can pop the color one in the chat.
Yeah, I should have that. If I don't have it right here, I can also include it in the post-event email, Lauren. If you
That
can
would be
share that with
great.
me, I can share that with the group as well.
Yes, that sounds great. That sounds great. And the fun part is that I think learning about color and learning about the combinations, that's another way to move outside of your box and have a novel experience with your project. So sometimes the novelty aspect and that the aspects of that stimulate our brains and really help with longevity, also could be skill building, or could also be design and design elements like the use of color and texture, and all of that is equally important, I think, in having and sharing novelty with each other. So I do really think that oh, thank you. The color theory Padlet is up as well. So a lot of opportunities to dig in further. And that really, I think, is key to the learning process. Like, what interests you the most is one of the things that I always want to emphasize, that sometimes I'll latch on to a new skill and it's just, that's the soup du jour, right? And so it's easy to think about it as everyone has different that everyone would order something different off the menu. But tonight I'm hoping to touch on a couple different things that might be kind of universally appealing to folks. So to start off, when I'm thinking of a project, so not only am I thinking about the color and the design elements, but one of the most important things for knitters is thinking about what yarn do I have available, right? What are my choices? And when it comes to, if I went to the store and I chose new yarn, how can I figure out what project matches with that yarn? And I wanted to point out two points related to that. The first is this wonderful, I think it's just such a wonderful website related to yarn substitution. So if you found a pattern that you're really, really keyed into that used a specific yarn that may just be available in Europe or you just don't find locally, this website allows you to insert that particular yarn and find exactly what would match with it. So they gave an example of Cascade 220, which is very popular. And it talks not just about the weight of the yarn, but the plies matter, right? So how much air is in between those plies matters for a lot of patterns. So it gives you the idea of other suggested substitutes that are plied in the same way, that have the same weight and the same texture, which really can make a difference in how the yarn presents itself for that particular project. Sometimes it really matters if it's a woolly yarn, and the plies really make a huge difference. And sometimes I think this website does a really great job of giving you not just the weight of the yarn. So when I say weight, I mean fingering, worsted, DK, Aran weight. Those are the weights of the yarn, but it also gives you a gauge for the texture of the yarn. So I think I think that makes a big difference. It's also telling you whether or not the gauge matches. So the gauge is really heavily influenced by, again, how fluffy is the yarn, how much textural quality does it have, and it's nice to see some of these that match each other. And then it gives you what might be sort of different about it as well. So in this case, this Galway heather, it's not as soft as the original. So they're really giving you a direct comparison between the yarn that's used in that pattern and the yarn that they're recommending. So I think this website is wonderful. I wish that I had found it sooner. So I hope that you'll use that as a tool. The other thing that I think is really helpful is thinking about the adjusting for heavier weights. So if, let's say you wanted, let's say you have a larger yarn that you think will be perfect for a project, but the pattern is written for a worsted weight yarn. So in this case, Tin Can Knits does a really great job of taking one of their patterns that was written for worsted weight yarn and giving you information about how you could do that pattern in an Aran weight. And I have found that it's really fun to experiment and to see what you can push the boundaries of, actually, I'm sorry, this was DK weight that they were using an Aran weight. And you can kind of push the boundaries of the math associated with the pattern and what the cast on of the DK weight pattern was versus the cast on of the Aran weight pattern. And I think it's fun to see how they adjusted it. And I've really enjoyed trying to adjust my own patterns, and playing with that math is a really fun part of that process. And it helps you kind of get a behind the scenes look into what pattern design really takes. And there is a lot of math and a lot of figuring out the best size choices. The ease of a pattern is something that I really learned a lot about through thinking about how to make adjustments to a pattern. So the ease, and many of you may already know this, but if you don't, I did not know for years what that really meant. So they would say, a size 36 inches with an ease of 6 inches. So that means that they're actually knitting for a pattern, they're knitting for size 42 because they want it to be looser. They want it to have a little bit of a baggy shoulder, or they want it to feel like a looser knit. Because if you don't have any ease in your sweater and it's a tighter knit, you want to make sure you're using yarn that's soft enough to sit against your skin, because it would be really hard to layer it. So when a model, like Andrea Mowry's pattern, she'll always say that she knit for size 36 with an ease of 6 inches. And I never quite realized that that meant she was essentially knitting a full size, or maybe even a full 2 sizes larger than her measurements. So I think that ease is kind of an interesting dynamic when it comes to sweaters. Obviously, that's where ease comes into play, but there is also figuring out how much ease you want in a hat. They don't usually use the word ease, but I think it is important to think about, like, how far down do you want it to come, down past your ears? Do you want it to slouch in the back? It's really important to kind of, the fit of a hat, I think, is sometimes just as challenging as the fit of a sweater. So I enjoy reading about pattern adjustments and thinking about what the modifications would look like if I was just really dying to use a specific type of yarn for a project. How could I make it work, right? And it's sort of improv to figure that out. I think that's a really interesting part of the project planning. And it's also a fun way to kind of delve into what it would look like to design your own patterns, which could be really interesting and stimulating for so many people. So are there any questions before I keep going? I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. So one of the things that I think is such an important part of the knitting process is how we talked a little bit last time about fixing mistakes and how do you go back in a project. And tinking is one thing, right? As you're going through a project, but also the trend right now in mending and visible mending as part of a intentional part of the process. So many times I'm sort of mesmerized by the way we can take the structure of the fabric and essentially mimic those stitches while mending. I think it's a very interesting. There are so many different ways to mend, but following along with the stitches, I think, gives you a better understanding of what knit fabric really is all about. So I put some links in here. I thought it would be easier for us to see together, that will take you directly to some Instagram links. And this one in particular, let me see if I can make this bigger here. So this particular mending process, I'm just going to see if it's nice and large for you. You can see how they started very far over to the right because they want their anchor yarn to sit away from the hole, right? So this could literally be like a friend of mine, her son had a sweater and his backpack had actually worn a hole in right at the shoulder line. And she used this very technique to essentially recreate that part of her knitting. And you can see here how they're following the exact V pattern of the stockinette. And it's fascinating to me that it seems so simple, right? They're following along. Some of the stitches they're mirroring, right? So right now they're going back over the stitches that already exist, but it blends right in, right? It's just like if you were to hold two yarn strands double, and it gives you a chance to really see it nice and flat, right? I mean, you could really, when you block that, it would be really hard to see in the long run. And keeping up with how that stitch is accomplished might take a few times to sort of view it. But I do think that it's an interesting part of the process to think about, like, how do you go two across? And you can see how they're going double through the V and then back double through the V below. And it's almost like you're creating a box pattern, right? You're going through the top layer and the bottom layer. And then when they hit the stitches that are missing, they're doing essentially the same exact thing and going through those bottom two. And each of the V's is connected to the two stitches, right? It's going under both parts of that V. And same thing here with the last missing stitch and across the top. So I'm hopeful that that's the kind of thing that, at least for me, if I watch that over and over again, I will eventually have it sort of ingrained in it'll help me visually do it along with them. Like if I had an exact sort of replica of that, my friend actually we sat together actually, and I watched her. We had the video in front of us and I watched her do it at the same time, and it was really easy to follow along. So I think it's sort of a fun process too. It's almost like it's quite interesting actually that it's somewhat therapeutic to watch. I feel like it's relaxing to watch, which is fun. They also have techniques in how to mend. Let's see if I can get this one to come up. Ways to mend with a crochet hook. And this particular Instagram page, she has a ton of technique videos, if you will. And I think, let me see if I can find the original one here. I don't want to miss the interesting thing about this one is she had a much larger space to fill. So she's using that unplied yarn. Essentially, it's threads, right? And then you wouldn't necessarily have to use unplied yarn, but I think they were doing that in order to have it spread out more. And you can see how they went back through those particular stitches at the top. And this would be if it was a much larger space and you needed more thread, right? You wouldn't want to cinch it up, but they're using the thread that they set aside on the left to create those particular stitches. And this one's maybe a little bit fast for me, but again, you can see how they anchor the yarn, and they're making sure that their anchors are far away from the hole. And I think it's a really interesting, fun thing to try. You could try it out to see if it works, and intentionally. There was a class in just mending, which I thought was really fascinating to think, in restoration projects. And we all have those knits that we would love to kind of reinvigorate. So it's interesting that it's almost like braiding, right? In this case, it really reminds me of braiding, like French braiding her hair. Sort of an interesting, fun thing to watch. So I think that I'm always curious about the ways in which people accomplish similar tasks, right? So that you could mend in a number of different ways. Catching a run, same thing as the crochet hook, giving you that chance to kind of see if I can make, and this particular, I just love, I don't know how she says it actually. I always say book how, but she has so many videos that are really sort of, again, mesmerizing in terms of uh, how she very carefully picks up each of those stitches with the crochet hook. And it gives you a chance to see what it would be like to fix a run like that, that it's not the end of the world, right? There, you can always get it straight back. And the way it looks at the end is just remarkable, that it actually is back on track so easily, right? It feels very satisfying, I think, to see that. The other piece that I think is really key to all of those types of projects, and really key to all the projects that you might have with color work, is figuring out the best way to join your yarn together. So you heard me talk about the joins and how we join our yarn and we anchor it far off, so that when you're let's see. Oh, this one really wants to play that music. Let's see if I can get that off here. The funny thing about joining your yarns together is it really depends on the fiber of the yarn. You can see this particular yarn is very textural and has woolly quality to it. And any yarn like that, you can split it like you see they're doing here, and very intentionally almost felt it together. And you can see she literally felts it together with her hands. And then she's essentially trying to get those plies to really tighten up against each other, and to think about how that would be, pretty reasonable thing to do with really woolly fibers that would grasp onto each other. So, it's, again, there's so many different ways that you can do those types of things. And these are just some things to think about and things that you might consider practicing. I really, my next cardigan is definitely going to have pockets. So I have been looking at what would it mean to take a great cardigan pattern that I already like and add a pocket to it without changing the structure of the pattern itself. And applied pockets, I think, is where I was excited to see this, because it's almost like working in the round, with these double point needles actually inserted into the work that you've already completed. So an applied pocket might be a really fun thing to add to really any project that you have started, or even projects that you've finished. You could go back and add the pockets now. So the applied pocket, essentially, you can see how they're working around the needle that they added in, that on all three sides, and then they'll reverse it and go back around the other direction and reverse it. This yarn is so textural, right? It's a little hard to see, but there's a bunch of different tutorials on how easy it is to add an applied pocket. I do actually think that using the really textural yarn makes it easy to, it could be, you could really give it, you wouldn't have to worry quite as much about being really even-handed with it. So yeah, you can see how they insert it into each of the stitches. A little harder to see on this particular yarn, but how you space out those stitches really matters too, because you want it to lay nice and flat. So, and then this Tin Can Knits article that came out recently on reversible cables. This is definitely something that I'm going to try very soon. I love any and one of the appealing parts of brioche and some of the rib patterns is how reversible they are. And I hadn't ever really thought about how nice it would be to have a reversible cable. And you can see in this particular work how it's sort of almost a different texture, but it really does look nice on both sides. And the way that she describes how she goes about doing that, and really how it's very similar to a regular cable, I think is really a fun part of the process. And you could make a reversible scarf, or you could make a cable really in any reversible pattern. And it's really pretty straightforward, which is nice to see. And essentially the only key is you're using a rib. So both sides have a rib texture on both ends. So I think I would, I'm definitely going to try out some reversible cables very soon. And then Twisted Knit is one of my all-time favorite. Joji Locatelli, one of my favorite designers, loves using a twisted rib, which essentially is a twisted knit on the edge of a hat. And the twisted rib itself is not at all difficult to accomplish, but essentially you're intentionally twisting the knit stitch, and you can see how they do that, and it creates almost like a really clear braided line. And I love to see those V's all lined up like that. And it's very stretchy, which is really nice for the edge of a sweater or a sleeve or the edge of a hat. And the way that she's twisting the back, she's essentially twisting it through the back. And you could see it once you watch it a few times, you start seeing it a little bit more. I think maybe Martha raised her hand. Am I right?
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
just recently I figured out that I've been knitting for years and years and years, and my normal knit was a twisted knit.
That is not uncommon. And I think that's great. I think anything that you do consistently, right? It's a twisted, you're a twisted knit, right? Every stitch was the same, right? Is that
I know, but it becomes a problem when you are cabling and when you're
oh,
doing things that you're supposed to be twisting and you can't twist because you already started twisting. That's kind of like what you do.
you've already done it. Yes, that's
Right.
interesting. Yeah, I could
And
see
that's how
that.
I figured out that it was because I mean, consistently I would make sweaters and the entire thing would be twisted and it was pretty and it looked fine, but not unless it was very complex cabling. And then
Right.
my cables look weird. And then I
Right,
finally
right.
figured out that I was twisting all the time,
All the time. Yeah, yeah. Oh,
even on a pearl. And I think that the reason for that is because I was taught by my mother, who was left-handed and I'm right-handed.
oh, that's interesting. So you're thinking that because she was coming from the opposite direction on each of the
Yeah.
stitches, or is that
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, that's how I learned to do it. But I
Yeah.
always came in from, it was like I reversed everything.
Reversed it all.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe I watched her and saw it in reverse and just did what I saw, but it's fine if you're, like you say, you're doing the whole thing one way, but if
Right.
you have to twist in a pattern, you can't do it because you've already twisted.
Right, right. Oh,
Mhm.
that's definitely true. That's interesting though that you figured it out, right? I mean, you could go on for a long time without figuring it out. So it's interesting that it took it a really like a cable pattern to figure out that it was already being twisted each time. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I really enjoy the textural quality of a
Yeah.
twisted knit. I think it's really It's fun to see. And obviously brioche is so popular for a reason. And I think one of the reasons is people really like that, the textural quality and how stretchy it is and so forth. Um, so yeah. And then the power of yarn over is such an immense, there are so many stitches that you can incorporate into let's say you have a basic hat pattern that you've knit in stockinette stitch for years that fits really well, that you know is really a good stitch count for for the size that you're looking for. Adding in intentional yarn overs, I think, can be a really rewarding part of the process. The yarn overs strategically placed, right? You wouldn't necessarily have to follow a chart, although some patterns that incorporate yarn overs do have charts. But this is a really good example of very intentionally just pulling the yarn across the stitches, putting it back on the other needle, and the yarn over was through the back in that case. And I wonder if I can slow this one down. I think they'll do it again. Let me see if, and when I make it bigger, does it show up bigger for you when I zoom out there?
It seems to have gotten a little bit closer on that one.
A little bit closer. Okay, that's good. I really and then the in between is just knitting, right? So they just went across. There's the yarn over. So the yarn over was back to front. Then they're going to pull that yarn over the 2 stitches, put them back on the left needle, do another yarn over, and you can see how it creates like a really interesting, almost like lattice work pattern. So if you searched for yarn overs, this particular reverse yarn over that comes from the back to the front, I think is particularly pretty because it has that braided effect that I'm finding really appealing lately. And by braided, I really mean those V's, that kind of signature stockinette V comes to the surface and creates those lattice patterns, which I find very appealing. So again, all of these links are saved on that Padlet, so you can go and watch them yourself. And I really like how you can have hard links saved, so you can go and reference them, and it doesn't require you to sign in or anything like that. So there's the yarn over. Yeah, so many intentional yarn overs. And then adding to that, when you have a yarn over in a certain direction or a certain shape, you can then also intentionally drop stitches. So drop stitches, I think, are really, oh, let's see if I can get in there so it doesn't do the audio. Oh, the fun thing about some of these patterns, oh, it really wants to play the music on that one. Let's see if I can get it to come up here. Let's watch a little bit of the... So you can see how these are really long, intentional drop stitches. And then she's going to come across them again and pick them back up. Oop. So you saw how she just picked that up right there in the center. And she's going to knit across and intentionally drop those long bars in between so that she can pick them back up and essentially create what looks like almost like a really intentional stitch on top of the fabric. So that I think is a fun way to think about, like, what is it about drop stitches and yarn overs that can be so appealing? And that leads me to mosaic knitting. And I'm wondering if anybody in the chat, if you've tried mosaic knitting, if you have any examples to show. But mosaic knitting is fundamentally so textural and so interesting. But fundamentally, it breaks down into just very simple slip stitches. And the fun part about those slip stitches is it gives you the opportunity to think about ways to create patterns and ways to create textural quality, not just with color changes, but with those stitches that stand out. And again, the Tin Can Knits patterns that they do a really great job of explaining exactly what the different numbers of stitches that you knit versus purl, and which direction you slip the stitches matters, whether or not your yarn is in the front or the back is really fundamental to the difference between a slip stitch pattern and a mosaic pattern. So what happens in sort of the way we define those is the words are sometimes used interchangeably, but the mosaic patterns typically have you slip the stitch with the yarn in front. So when the yarn's in front and then you move it back after you've slipped the stitch, that leaves the yarn in the front of the particular pattern that you're working on. So what I would like to do, let me see if I can stop this share here. And I'm going to show you my camera. Let's see if I can. And while I'm doing that, I will answer Michelle's question. How are you?
I'm good. I just wanted to, so this is, I don't know if you can see it. It's whoops, there we go. It's
Oh, is it mosaic? Yes. Oh, I love that. So is it boxes? It looks almost, yes, yes.
It's a long slip stitch. And it came from a book called Building in Color. It's the third in a series.
Building in Color, you said. Oh,
Yeah, let me change my background. Hold on. Let me get rid of the fuzzy.
Yeah, that would be great. And that would be
so
oh, yes. Oh, I love, and it looks like yours is the one right on top there.
So yeah, so it's a whole blanket, but every block is different, but it's all about different tech, similar to what you're just saying about slipping a stitch.
Right. Oh, that's wonderful. That is so great. And I love seeing how it created like the boxes that have a shadow effect, right? Because there's so much texture there. And am I seeing it right that one of the stitches in the block is a darker color?
Yes.
Oh, that's so great.
So yeah, so there's one little tiny square on it.
Oh, I love that. So a little bit of color work behind the scenes too, which is creating even more depth to each of those. Yeah, that's wonderful. And is it like a greenish blue with a dark navy, or?
It's a navy, a gray, and it's not a white, but it's not a cream color either.
Right. Oh, it's wonderful. And I love the look of the slip stitches too. They're elongated, and you did a great job of keeping them all nice and even. They look really nice.
But here's another just a different version of it.
Oh, yes.
So they're really just a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I think you should, well, do you feel like they were hard? I like, it's not hard, right?
No, I'm trying to, this one I didn't like.
Oh, you had to count, right?
Well, you didn't have to count, but you had to remember and pay attention with the zigzags. But these were a lot of fun and very easy to do, because once you got into a rhythm, it just made it nice and easy to do it that way.
Yeah. And you can really keep up with it. Surprisingly easy, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And the nice part about those mosaic stitches is you could do that you could do any cowl length. You could do it on any sweater pattern. You could do it for just the top section of a sweater, and then the rest could be basic stockinette. You can really incorporate those stitches just about anywhere. So it's fun to learn. Once you've learned it too, you can apply it to all different patterns. So that's fun. How did you learn about it? Just from that book initially, or?
Yeah, it's just, so she has a series. This is the third book. It was building blocks, basic stuff. Then it was building in lace. That one was painful. I'll never repeat that one again.
Oh no, not
no.
your cup of tea. Yeah.
But this one has been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Tell me the name of the author again. I'll pop it in the, I'm going to add to the Padlet with everything that you all share today.
It's
Whoop.
by Michelle Hunter of Knit Pearl Hunter.
Knit Pearl Hunter. Okay, great. Wonderful. I will put that right in. And it looks like she has a lot of patterns on Ravelry too.
She also, she has a great lot, but I'm enjoying the Padlet library that you have of a variety of videos, but she has a whole website that has videos that go along. And so every page has where she tells you, you know, like here are the video links of what you to help with the pattern.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, that's even, I love that. Anytime that there's like it'll walk you through it, right?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, that's great. Well, I added it to the pattern sharing right at the top. So that
Okay.
is linked for everybody. And actually I may have added the main Ravelry page that probably links all three of those books that you mentioned. So, yeah, that's wonderful. Wow, time is really flying tonight. My goodness. I wonder if anyone has anything else to share. I would love to hear from you. And let me see if I can get us back to seeing everyone. Sandy, yes, I see a hand. How are you? Oh, let me ask to unmute here. See if it'll cooperate. There we go. Oh, it's still, oh goodness. Is it still muted for everyone else? I think it's, oh, it went on and then it went back off again. Let's see. I wish I had control, but they don't let us unmute you. Rightfully so, right?
I unmuted myself, so maybe that's
Yeah, I think she has to. I see that it's she's unmuting and then there you go.
Okay, there we go.
Yes.
Yarn Database is another wonderful website for designers, yarns, just all kinds of stuff.
You said it's called Yarn Database.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. And I think I see it here as yarndatabase.com.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
A lot of designers on there.
Great. This looks like a great tool too to think of, like it has an opportunity really to look at through a lot of different types of things that could stimulate your interest, right? Sometimes that's what it takes. It's almost like when I was a little kid, I loved paging through the encyclopedia. And I loved reading nonfiction books. So that was like the first gateway. And this looks like the database looks like a really fun gateway to digging in more to specific things. Have you found anything really interesting on there?
I've only played with it a little bit. I have so many projects in the queue that I don't want to find any more projects, and I definitely don't need to find any more yarn for a while.
I know that feeling. For sure. Well, I popped the yarn database on our Padlet too, under the pattern sharing side. It looks like there's lots and lots of patterns to see there as well.
And yarns from all over the world.
Yeah, which is so fun to see. I recently had a neighbor bring me yarn from Spain, and it is so interesting to watch it unfold. It's an ombre that is self-striping at the same time. And it is just so fun to knit. It's almost like you want to keep going just to see how it unfolds, right? So the yarn can be really stimulating in that way. Well, thanks for sharing. That's so fun. I hadn't heard of it before. So 2 new things. I'm excited about that. Anyone else have anything else fun to share, or like specific patterns that you love to knit? One of my favorite patterns is the Shift Cowl by Andrea Mowry. I have that on the pattern sharing. Has anyone knit that one before? Yes. Oh, good. Yeah. Linda was raising her hand. I thought so. That's fun. It's a fun one, right?
It is. I've made it actually about 3 or 4 times. I really like her design work, Andrea Mowry. The other cowl of hers that I really also like is the Inclination cowl.
Oh, I wondered about that one. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's
yeah, is that mosaic also?
no, it's
No?
not. It's very easy, but you knit through the stitch below.
Oh,
It's a drop stitch sort of thing, and it's actually very quick. Because it doesn't, the pattern doesn't really change through the whole cowl, but I use Spin Cycle Yarns, which is a yarn store out of Bellingham, Washington. It's not particularly cheap yarn, but it's really beautiful yarn, and it has a lot of gradient to it. So the color of the cowl changes throughout the knitting process. So,
yes, beautiful yarn. And they
yeah.
actually very generously sent Project Knitwell hundreds of seconds, hundreds of
Oh my
seconds.
gosh.
Yes. And we have just been so thrilled. And our refugee program specifically, they are so excited to be able to knit blankets in spin cycle yarn. I mean, that they are
Wow.
$400 blankets, right? But
Yeah,
they
yeah,
are the most beautiful blankets you've ever seen. So they have been very generous. It's funny that you brought up spin cycle. I think
yeah.
it's if you knit Andrea Mowry's patterns, you've definitely been tempted by spin cycle before.
Right. Yeah, they have a partnership that they work with. So,
Yes,
yeah.
quite a bit. I met them actually at Maryland Sheep and Wool last year, and that's where the in-kind donation came from. So
Oh,
they have
wow.
been supplying us with yarn all year, and no end in sight to the amount of yarn that they've sent us is incredible. So
So tell me specifically about the refugee project that you mentioned, if you don't mind.
sure. Yeah. We knit with, we started
Oops.
about almost 2 years ago. We started knitting with, Afghan refugees that had just arrived. And we now have two groups, one here in Arlington, Virginia, and one in Woodbridge, Virginia. There are a number of different groups around the country as well. And it's an opportunity for them to meet each other and to interact with our volunteers to learn English. And I am amazed at how quickly we can communicate uh, how to knit with a language barrier. And then throughout the process, we've been able to get to know their families, their children come to the knitting circle with us. So it's primarily a community builder around the yarn, just like we've been doing for decades, right? And it gives us something to talk about. It gives us something to bond over, or it gives the women something to bond over. And they are incredibly productive knitters. It is
Yeah.
amazing to me.
Did these women know how to knit before, or are they learning brand new knitting? Because
They
I'm
are,
mentoring an Afghan family as well. They all sew.
yeah.
And the 11-year-old daughter, I take my knitting out there oftentimes when I visit, and she's quite fascinated by it. And so she and I have been talking about learning to knit. But our Afghan families that we're working with are really not in a place to congregate. They don't have good public transportation is really the problem for
Well,
us right at the
we are,
moment. But
yeah, we are so lucky because our local Catholic Charities pays for their Ubers to come to us, which is just an incredible resource, and it really is such an important part of their week. I mean, they really they benefit from it in so many ways. And it feels like they're empowered to meet each other, but also interacting with our volunteers gives them confidence. Like we had two women that interviewed for a job and felt confident enough in their interactions to secure those jobs, and came back telling us that if it wasn't for your, it's kind of the ability to communicate as well as they could in English, they felt more confident just based on being able to talk to our volunteers as brand new English speakers too. So
that's a great idea for sort of a grant proposal kind of to do the Ubering. And so thanks. Very good.
yes,
Thank you very
absolutely.
much.
And there are so many organizations that are also donating those types of transportation and so forth. So yeah, that's it's also really inspiring because I think of it, most of our opportunities when we come together around knitting, it's about more than just the knitting, right? That's one of the best parts about everyone that I've had a chance to teach them how to knit. It's always more than just learning that particular skill. It's and the tradition of knitting together, I think, is just as powerful for all of us. So, and the community around it. And I mean, really, when it comes down to all the, like when I met, when I was at Maryland Sheep and Wool, which is really like a pilgrimage, right? When you're in a spot with all the people that are craving wool just like you are, right? It's funny to think about it in the ways that we've built community around fiber for decades and centuries, really. So it's fascinating to me. I don't know if anyone saw Stephanie Pearl McPhee, who is the author that I like to mention, who's sort of a comedian at the same time. She did a talk for Fiberside Chats on the history of knitting. And next time, that's what we're planning to talk a little bit about, to dig into what are the traditions surrounding kind of the sentimental nature. And Jill Wolcott will join us. She's a designer, also a fashion design teacher, and she will talk a little bit about sort of the cultural touch points. And we'll take a little side tour to the Center for Knit and Crochet, which is an online repository of really sentimental crafts through the years. And you'll be invited also, if you would like to add your knits to the repository. The digital space that they've created is really fascinating to see how knitting evolved over decades and across different cultures. So I'm excited for that next time too. So time is just flying tonight. I don't know if you feel the same way, Maddie. Did I catch on everything that?
Yeah, I think we covered everything. I'll just chime in about our next event, just since we're obviously talking about it at the moment. So it is live on our calendar on the website. I'm also going to put the link in the chat here. So it's scheduled for February 16th. Again, it will be recorded similar to all of our other sessions. So if you're not able to make it, of course, the recording will be available. I'll also send the link out tomorrow in the post-event email with the Padlet links, all that information sort of in one place, so everybody has that. But again, if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to reach out to me directly, and I can, point you in the right direction or hopefully help you reach the right person to answer those questions. But it was wonderful to see some patterns that people were working on tonight and hear everyone's stories. So it's really been wonderful. And thank you to Lauren again for a wonderful event. And thank you all again for joining us.
Yes, absolutely. And as always, let me know if you have any questions or anything that I can share more about. I'll pop my email in the chat as well. And I hope that you're inspired to find some new and novel patterns and techniques to try out. So thanks so much for coming.